Hello and welcome to the Game Dev London podcast, a community of people who love making games and talking about games, whether or not they're based in London. Today I'm your host Anna, and I'm delighted to be joined by Valentyn Minytskyi, a lead VFX artist from Playground Games, and obviously today we'll be talking about VFX. Hi Valentyn, how are you doing? Thank
Hi
you for
Anna.
joining. Do you want to introduce yourself to
Yeah,
our
doing
audience?
great. Hi all, and again, thanks for having me. As Anna mentioned, my name is Valentyn Minytskyi, and I'm a lead VFX artist at Playground Games, working on Forza Horizon project. I'm working as a lead VFX artist for about 10 years already, and I'm in the game development industry for 15 years. And during that time, I've worked on a variety of different projects from small social games for Facebook and other social networks to a variety of AAA projects and MMOs, etc., etc. So yeah, enjoying my craft and yeah, would like to share some of those knowledge with you today.
Amazing. That's like a huge career. I'm very sure you're going to have so much knowledge. Starting with like, what is a VFX artist? I've worked with VFX artists before, but beyond knowing that you do some particle effects, I have no idea. So tell us about it.
So in the game development industry, VFX artists are the people that basically working on creating, as you might guess, a variety of effects. And compared to like post-production industry, where VFX artists are people that would be modeling stuff and animating things and characters as well. But as I mentioned, in game development, it's a pretty narrow field where you basically animate different kind of elements. So lightnings, rains, smoke, fire. Obviously, we also creating stuff like muzzle flashes, explosions, uh, uh, bullet hits on variety of different surfaces, and also all those cool spells that you see in a lot of fantasy RPG games and stuff like that. So yeah, that's the VFX art.
It's very interesting how there is such a huge difference between VFX in games, like doing all those like just effects, and VFX in other industries where it's as you were saying, like modeling and animating. I would assume like all those cool dragons, all of that is done by VFX. Do you have a lot of people like joining games industry being very confused as to what they're going to be doing? Have you ever noticed anything like that?
Well, yeah, it happens from time to time. When the people from post-production join the game industry, they sometimes assume that um, they're gonna be working more on modeling and texturing different assets or characters, or maybe animating something, or a lot of other things. But as I mentioned, yeah, in game development, VFX is way narrower field than in post-production. So yeah, we are basically um, animating those elements and variety of other different things depending from the company, I guess. On the other hand, almost every VFX artist in the game development industry is a pretty good specialists and actually a variety of fields. So we can also model, texture, animate using various techniques, work with different simulations, um, also a little bit of tech art, rendering, shader creation. So yeah, it just depends what actually works in your engine and in your game, and we will try to make it happen.
That sounds like people who want to be VFX artists need a lot of different skills. I didn't realize it was that complicated. If like people wanting to get into this career, what kind of things you would say they should focus on the most?
So actually, a lot of my fellow VFX artists that I worked in a variety of different teams, they came from other art fields in game development. So some of them were actually modelers with like 5 or 10 years of experience. Other spent some time animating. There's also people that loved tech art, but they also liked creating those effects or working on those effects. So, and didn't like necessarily working on the procedural world building. So they could switch from tech art to VFX. Again, tech art and VFX are like really close fields in game development. So basically, I would say it's quite possible to switch from any other art field to VFX. Even if you are concept artist and you basically draw in Photoshop, there's a lot of games that actually require frame by frame animation drawing on those fire, smokes, etc. Old school Disney style. Um, and yeah, you can definitely switch your career to VFX if you have experience in those fields. Um, Additionally to that, I would say if you worked with video editing or um motion design, it also a pretty good foundation to switch to VFX because you already know a lot of things, and like motion design is pretty close as well because you probably know a lot of tricks of trade with animation and making things look good and snappy in terms of their movement. So yeah, that would be also a pretty good foundation to go to real-time FX. And additionally, if you worked on post-production VFX, if you were creating scenes where there was like destruction, again, lightning bolts hitting everything, or huge explosions, or splashes of water, etc., etc. Again, like really good foundation to switch from post-production to game development. Um, and again, you can actually bring a lot of interesting new ideas to game development working in post-production previously. So yeah, a lot of fields basically would allow you to switch.
That it sounds like very diverse. Uh, you were mentioning like drawing in Photoshop and stuff, and got me thinking like, is there a difference between 2D VFX artists and 3D VFX artists? Because like I know for like other types of artists, it's kind of like completely two different fields and require completely different skills. Is that the same for VFX, or is it more transferable?
I think it's definitely way more transferable than in other fields, like for example, 2D or 3D animation. On the other hand, every good 3D animator would tell you that knowing the basic principle, like 10 principles of animation, is this core foundation that you need to be good with animating in any kind of style if you're doing realistic animations. Same with VFX. If you are trying to do okay, so on that thought, there is definitely a difference in terms of how you create effects between effects that have more fluid 2D animation feel to them compared to realistic effects in realistic games like Call of Duty or something else. But the core principles, 10 principles of animation, are definitely still there, and you usually need to know them and use them where they're applicable to make your effects look good, snappy, and visually interesting. And again, there's also a lot of same applicable techniques in terms of, you still need to understand how to properly observe your subject matter to transfer it later on to be a fix in the game, no matter if it's realistic or um, stylized. So yeah, the only thing, as I mentioned, the techniques are different. So realistic VFX probably require sometimes more tech knowledge compared to uh, stylized 2D effects, especially if they're hand drawn. They require more um, being more art savvy, understanding um, frames and yeah, how that animation works. But I would definitely say that it's way better to know how to do a good stylized hand-drawn effects, um, and then you would be able to pretty easily quickly switch to doing realistic effects. Then knowing how to do tech stuff, doing realistic effects, but not understanding the core principles of animation, because at that point your, I don't know, texture, materials, models, whatever that you're going to be using, shaders in your effects would be working correctly, but your effects still would look odd or not snappy enough, not interesting. So yeah, I would say foundation and basic are quite important as well.
So basically, get first become a 2D artist and stuff, and then move on to tech. You were
Well,
talking about yeah.
I wanted to say it's not necessarily. I'm saying that it would be highly valuable for you to have those skills. You don't necessarily even need to finish the project as a uh, creating stylized 2D effects. Just trying your hand in those, maybe going through a course or two, or looking some watching some YouTube videos about how those effects created, and maybe just try to follow them with your Wacom and Photoshop and see if it will go well. If not, then maybe there's some interesting things that you don't know yet, and there's a lot of ways you can improve.
You were talking about the animation principles. What are they?
So there is a well-known 10 principles uh, animations of animation. Those were formulated by, I guess, Disney. Again, maybe I'm wrong here, but basically with those old school animators that work in Disney, I guess in 40s, 50s, and yeah, I won't go through all of them, but if you will just Google 10 principles of animations, there's a lot of uh, good articles about them, and there's also just a pretty good GIFs that would explain them via animation rather than trying to explain them with words. So yeah, those are pretty good.
Yeah, that's very handy. Didn't know that existed. I wish there were 10 principles of game design. You can just learn and be good at it. Um, what's your favorite VFX effect you've created in your career that you're like very, very proud of?
Um, I guess as a lot of different artists, I won't say that there's something special and favorite. I'm definitely more fond of my recent work than the work that was like done by me 5 or 10 years ago, because I'm basically on a journey improving my craft and my skills, and every next VFX is better, hopefully better than the previous one, because if the next one would be worse or less interesting, then that means I'm kind of regressing rather than improving. So yeah, the best things are ahead of me, and the recent best were like this year or last year. Effects that we done for Forza Horizon 5. I would say definitely the best currently, but yeah, looking forward.
But like, what is I guess is there something like very interesting or like unusual that you worked on that it was like kind of fun, as in like designing it and making it?
Um, Again, I would say that every effect that I or my team are creating, or my previous team were creating, uh, we usually, we don't use the same techniques that we used previously. We partially use the same techniques, but because we want to make it better, we're trying something new. So uh, there is a pretty um interesting process of research and development every time that you're creating a new effect. Well, obviously, if you have time, of course. So you're trying to explore additional possibilities, how to do the same thing that you did previously, but better. How to improve the materials, how to improve the motion, or how to improve the shader in the current engine that you're working in, and stuff like that. So yeah, I would say I'm having a lot of fun creating any kind of effects. And uh, I know that some people are like want to create some specific, I don't know, huge explosion VFX or some specific magical spell VFX, or uh, everyone obviously have their own and favorite one. But I definitely say that even the smallest effects have actually a lot of depth in terms of uh, how they're created and actually how to improve them, how to make them look better. And every time you return to the same, I don't know, bonfire effect, there's additional ideas that you probably didn't use previously, or a better understanding how to do it better. And you restart your journey again with this specific effect, and you're pushing your craft. So yeah, I won't say, sorry, I probably will disappoint you, but I won't say that there's a my favorite one or that I specifically like to do. So yeah, if you like your craft, every small thing, no matter how small it is, actually could, you know, create a pretty big challenge for you.
That's very interesting. I kind of always thought that there was like a correct way of doing an effect, but it turns out that there are different techniques for the same thing. That's really cool. Um,
Yeah, so I wanted to say that um, compared to a lot of other um, art, uh, I don't know, art departments in games or art disciplines, in VFX there are some techniques to create some specific effect, but every effect could be created in so many different ways, and it depends from if you're creating a realistic effect or stylized effect, how stylized it is, what your engine actually support, what kind of shader work you can do, etc., etc. So yeah, basically, if it looks good and it looks believable, and it doing its gameplay thing that game designers requested you to do, then it's good. But there is no wrong or right ways. They're just the final visuals and performance, obviously, that matters.
performance, always the problem in any game. How do you, like when you're looking at the effects that you're creating, how do you, what's your thought process, I guess, when you're deciding how this needs to be improved and whether it needs to be improved or it's like good enough for the game, because you know, like nothing can be perfect.
Uh, so yeah, that's a very interesting question. Again, as a lot of artists looking back at what you've created, you always find a good new idea how to improve it, or you're thinking like, oh, if I would have a little bit more time, I would be able to implement that and that, and or make it look better in some specific situations, etc. So again, I think there is a pretty good proverb. I think it was Leonardo da Vinci that said that art could never be finished, only abandoned. So that's the case with me as well.
But like, at what point do you abandon then art? Like, what do you, how do you
At what
decide?
point?
Yeah, how do you decide it's good enough for you?
Um, so I think when it serves its purpose, first and foremost, and it also looks good, and I guess art direction are happy with how it looks, and there is no more feedbacks. Additionally to that, it quite performant as well on the variety of platforms that you are targeting your game to be released on. then it's good enough, because there's probably a lot of other things uh, in the pipe for you to work on and create. So yeah, you still switching to something else.
Yeah, makes sense. Basically, get a minimum viable product everyone is happy with and move on. Uh,
Well, I guess you might say so, but in some situations, again, you can always, I don't know, look at it and think that maybe a new way, or some better way how to improve performance. And if you would be able to do that, then uh, you know some other effects uh, would be possible to in this game as well. So you can try to push performance forward. Or, for example, our direction is happy, but you, I don't know, at the last moment figure out that there's something really cool in your head, that idea that can improve it drastically. So again, you can go to our direction and ask if, or your lead, and ask like, hey, pitch that idea, and maybe if there's enough time, yeah, you can start improving. But I mean, there's always something else to do.
yeah, that's game development. Um, Jesus, I had a question in my head and it just slipped my mind. Um, how do how much creative control do you have as a VFX artist? Like you were mentioning art direction and feedback from them, and like designers with like or what it needs to do, but like when you're making an effect, do you look at the feature and decide where the VFX need to go, or like do you just get a list of we need a fire here, we need a fire there, we need a bullet flying? How does it work?
Okay, so I think as every artist, you have actually a lot of creative control over what you're doing. And me being as a lead, I set some level of visual fidelity for my team, and I also give them feedbacks and ask for improvements if necessary, etc., or pitch the ideas how they should look, and to work with everything else. Um, I would say there's definitely a main theme, or main art direction of your game. So if you're creating a realistic game, then maybe creating a stylized effects would kind of look wrong with overall game direction, and vice versa. So obviously you're relying on overall game style for those effects. Um, After that, you constantly keeping in mind the performance that you can spare for that effect, because there probably would be other effects, and it should be performant, all of them should be performant enough, so you would be able to actually accommodate all of them at the same time on screen. uh, there is also quite important moment, especially if it's um, some kind of gameplay effect, uh, in maybe some RPG game, or something like League of Legends, or maybe Diablo or whatnot. So there's a game design purpose of that effect, and there's obviously a game designer's request about it. And again, it's quite important because, for example, if game designers ask you to create a fireball or some kind of bullet shot, there's obviously a lot of dependencies in terms of what kind of damage that fireball will do, what would be the area of effect damage as well of that one. So again, you don't want to create a fireball explosion that would be all over the screen, but the damage area would be maybe like, I don't know, a couple of centimeters on the screen or something like that, etc. So there's a lot of restrictions like that you must keep in mind when you're creating effects. Same again for the realistic effects. Maybe muzzle flash from a small rifle should be, again, probably smaller than um, muzzle flash from high caliber machine gun, and so on and so forth. Even if those both of those rifles are not realistic or some kind of sci-fi weapons and stuff like that. So you're keeping all of those things in mind, and then you basically create the effect playing with all of those restrictions. But in the end of the day, uh, it's quite an interesting and creative process to actually, squeeze as much as you can with your art direction, the gameplay purpose of the effect, with the performance that you can spare, and at the same time make it look as good as you can, and also properly work on the screen with other effects.
You make sure that players are not just bombarded with fires and bullets and everything. Like, how do you have, like, how in UI you have hierarchy of fonts, like you can't use like more than three big fonts, and I don't know the actual rules, but there are, like, do you have something similar for like UX and VFX?
So, yeah, I mean, analyzing some games, like for example, like World of Warcraft, you can quickly come to a conclusion that there's actually some weights assigned to a lot of different spells, and there's also color coding for those spells. So, obviously, fire spells are all kind of red and orangey, but healing spells, depending from the game, they could be all of them should could be green. So, if the healing spells are color coded green in your game, then probably all healing should be green, so it would be easier for player to understand. And for something like, for example, in Overwatch, the color for healing is actually yellow. So all yellow VFX are actually healing some kind of healing spells or something like that. You don't create half of your healing green, half of your healing yellow, and maybe also put like a poison as green as well, because it would mislead the player. So, and so on and so forth. Same for the poison. Some games decide that poison should be purple, and some games decide that poison should be actually green. So, and so on and so forth. So there's definitely a hierarchy of those colors, and in a lot of and also sizes and silhouettes of those effects. There's also such a thing as, for example, more aggressive damaging effects would kind of use the pointy shapes in their silhouette compared to more round shapes that probably would be used for something like healing, etc. So there's color coding, shape silhouette coding, obviously size, how fast it is or how slow it is, and so on and so forth. All of those are usually decided in the um, art direction documentation for the game that is usually again created be in some pre-production stage, and then it's used for all the effects. So everything that is created by every team member from VFX team would be consistent in terms of its shape, color, and so on and so forth. So yeah, as you mentioned, there's definitely a should be a pretty good art direction documentation about all of those. And usually those are developed by art director and lead VFX artist, maybe principal VFX artist in the pre-production stage of the game.
And like for people who, I don't know, making their own games and they are the VFX and the art director, what kind of things like except for like color coding and all of that, like, is there anything particular that also goes into that Bible that would be useful?
Um, I would say if you're creating your own game, if you're an indie game developer, I don't know, if you're alone, then I guess you can probably keep everything in your head. If you have a team of 10 people, then maybe you are the only VFX artist in that team, and maybe you also have an art director or somebody that kind of leading overall art in your game. So again, it's always good to speak with him, decide, maybe create some quick sketches in Photoshop to just approve things, and yeah, decide that you will go that way. Um, and yes, stay consistent. Additionally to that, there's there's actually a lot of really good, I would say, VFX art documentations from other games that you can look at to, you know, get an idea how it's done and uh, what and how to think about things when you're going to be designing and creating effects for your game. Obviously, having a list of spells or weapons or something like that beforehand would be quite useful. So if at the get-go you can get like 10 weapons um, or 10 spells from your game designers, you can quickly developer.
Um, okay. So basically, you were talking about also like VFX documentation where people can see like what to think about and this kind of stuff when you're designing VFX. Do you have? Can you like summarize some of the things that you found interesting when reading those? Like, what I guess the most important things apart from like performance and like we know like about gameplay purpose and stuff, but like how do you achieve that? I guess is my question.
How do you achieve creating the effect, or how do you achieve, I don't know, visual?
Uh, just in general, like when you're designing a like an effect, what kind of things uh, do you think like are the most important to think about, excluding that the performance and gameplay purpose and stuff?
Okay. So um, if you're working on a realistic game, then obviously when you're thinking about how that effect should look, you first find a proper references or capture them, or maybe they were captured already during the pre-production stage, so you return to them. Then you looking into those and trying to understand the subject matter and how, I don't know, dust evolves or something like that. You try to distill in your head what an actual physical process is going on and how it behaves, and also how it would behave in some other situations. And based on that, you decide on techniques that you're going to be using for creating that effect. In some cases, currently there is actually no choice because of some other restrictions as perf, for example. So yeah, you're choosing your technique, and then you start building that effect. You maybe um, will start with something pretty simple, that I would say like a white box effect, where you're building your effect and you don't mind about the performance or anything like that, or don't mind about it in general. You obviously don't slap tons of particles and tons of textures to it, and then understand that you would need to cut half of it, and it actually would lose its visuals. So anyway, going, yeah, you're creating that effect in your, I guess, particle system, or maybe it's a effect that you are going to be using just mesh and shader approach or something like that. And yeah, you creating a white box effect that kind of have a lot of behaviors that you saw in the references. Then you try to push the material and the texture of what you're creating to be closer to what again you saw in the references. And maybe at that point you are kind of ready to show it to uh, your lead or art director to get some smaller feedbacks. So basically, you've created an effect that kind of looks and kind of behaves the way you saw in the reference. So yeah, hearing some other people opinions probably would be a good at this point. And also again, in my personal opinion and in my personal approach, I like to show effect that I'm creating earlier to art direction or to whoever I need to approve them with. So I would make sure that I'm going into the right direction rather than, spending a couple of weeks creating something that you look good and then finding out that it wasn't even what I don't know, art direction was looking to see or game design actually needed. And again, there's already tons of stories like that. And one of the oldest one I remember there was a GDC talk about the VFX of Diablo. So it was kind of like a post-mortem, and that was a use case when game designers asked about the VFX for some kind of ballista spell, and VFX Artist actually created an animated ballista that was shooting some pretty big bolts. But yeah, the ballista was actually just a code name. It wasn't connected to actual ballista in any way or form. So they had to rework it. So, and I think most of the VFX artists had a story like that in their career where they kind of misunderstood was what was wanted, or the information was, sent as a just one sentence in your messenger, and the actual result was completely different from what was actually expected from you. So, yeah, showing some white box thing always a good idea to make sure that overall size and shape and maybe um, the snappy how snappy the animation is, or maybe how slow the animation is what was actually expected. And then you can start polishing with proper material, proper textures, etc., etc.
Yeah, I think it's like really important just in general to communicate with different departments who are involved, like even working like with engineers or artists or anything. Uh, Interpreting a design is like a really difficult job. I think like no matter how good the design is, there is still room for misunderstanding. So yeah, like checking up with whoever you're working with or for or whatever, like is very important. You were mentioning references. What kind of references like do you get? Is it more? Is it better to always go for like real life things, or do you also use like movies and games for references as well?
I think movie and games, they're not for the references, they're more for inspiration to look like how other people, how other artists actually tackled the effect that you're trying to create, what how their stuff looked. To it could inspire you, it can give you some ideas, but I think it would be wrong to actually use movies or other games as your main source of references, because you're basically copying a copy of real subject matter in our world. Um, there's, of course, things that you can get the reference for, because I guess there's unfortunately no real applicable magic spells that you can capture on video. Well, at least from what I know. Uh, or if you need an explosion of a space station, thanks God, there's no videos that can show you those either. So, yeah, at that point, maybe looking into the some videos of explosions and maybe thinking about how it would work in outer space, and also looking at how it was created in films, and maybe how your audience would actually would await how it would look, uh, would make sense. But if you're creating something that actually exists in real world, I would say it's always a good idea to find a good reference. If you can't capture it yourself, obviously you need to go to YouTube or Vimeo or something, or maybe buy um, videos from stock stock videos, web pages, and stuff like that. But I also would say that a lot of good VFX artists, no matter if they were working on stylized things or on realistic effects, they all suggest you to try and find the opportunity to go and capture a video of what you're going to be creating yourself. Um, and I'm totally on board with that idea because when you actually sing it for yourself and you can choose whatever the angle that you would like, well, in most of the cases, obviously, if you're capturing volcano, then maybe, yeah, you are limited with the angles of video capture. But yeah, you can look at the different sides of it, and you also kind of when you're looking into it, not through the camera, but obviously you're not filming it constantly. You're just looking and studying it. A lot of additional this experience and knowledge settles in, and then you have a better understanding how it works, how it looks, and with videos on YouTube, you're like pretty limited for the amount of observation time that you can do, or with angles, etc. But if you saw it yourself, it's way easier to create a way better effect than you would be able to if you were just limited to several YouTube videos. Because again, you know how it should look, and it's really hard to, kind of trick yourself to doing something worse that you actually saw. I actually never exploded anything, although I did a lot of explosions in my life. Um, I mean, VFX of explosions, obviously. So yeah, never exploded anything myself. Unfortunately, because of my work, I had to watch through the tons of explosions. Like for example, when I was working in one of my previous companies, Wargaming, and I was working on World of Tanks and World of Warplanes. We watched through tons of World War II footage of from different sides of the conflict, etc. So yeah, this is a part that yeah we have to do as VFX artists to get our visuals correct. Um, in terms of what the most extreme that I actually saw in real life, I guess it would be a semi-erupting volcano in Sicily. But again, it wasn't like a full eruption. At that point, it was visited by tourists, so I was one of the tourists from a tourist group. But that volcano is semi-active all the time. It constantly have those smoke plumes going out every now and then, and you also um, have this smell constantly in the air of sulfur. So yeah, things like that. And it's actually erupted the next year, from what I heard. So yeah, so I filmed all of those on a video cam from kind of different, really safe angles, from really far away. Yeah,
Yeah,
things
but
like that.
sounds really cool. I don't know, like that sounds like a really cool part of the job to go to like volcanoes and stuff and see things happen. You one of the things you mentioned is like, oh, think about how players would expect. Um, is there? Have you ever noticed that? Is there like any dissonance between what people expect things to look and what things look like? Specifically, like I mean, in games, I know like there is a lot of we need to do what people expect rather than how things work in real life in game design with I don't know, like guns and stuff, for example. Like is it similar in VFX as well?
Yeah, it's definitely very similar with VFX. Um, Obviously, a lot of people saw action movies of different kind, and the muzzle flashes of most of the guns have this really big fire muzzle that actually kind of doesn't happen that much in real life. If you will look at how, I don't know, muzzle flashes from M16 looks in the videos and how they look from videos from a shooting range, they are quite very different. So because most of the people saw more movies rather than actual footage from shooting range or war. And again, because in movies everything kind of looked flashier, this was adopted in most of the games. Again, if I'm gonna say like Call of Duty, Battlefield, all other games, they're doing their mother flashes with more fire compared to real world counterparts. There is a small trend right now, I would say, to move to more realistic representations of explosions, muzzle flashes, and other things. Uh, a lot of explosions currently in video games doesn't look as oily, I would say, how they looked, I don't know, 10 years ago. Like, for example, every grenade explosion in um, action movies from 90s look more like a small oil barrel exploded or something like that. Tons of fire, tons of black smoke and something like that. So a lot of games recreated that as well. But again, right now it feels like more and more games they're looking into real visual representation of those things, real footage, and then making their effect look more like a real thing. Um, so yeah, that's how people expect things to look. And again, with something like spells, there's obviously games like World of Warcraft or Diablo or League of Legends and Dota, etc. And there's already a pretty well established overall visual style of how some spells should look like. And that's basically what people expect to see. So if you will try to do something totally different, it might mislead people in a lot of ways, and they from a get-go they wouldn't understand what is the gameplay purpose of that spell that you're casting. So yeah, there's definitely a pretty big expectation because there's a lot of trends in VFX in games specifically and in movies generally. But again, every now and then there's like really interesting game that is um, out and it tries to do it affects a little bit different, not as everybody else, but somehow similar. And yeah, at that point it kind of looks cool and yeah, fresh, I would say. So yeah, something like that.
Yeah, like it's always in game development very important to look what other games do, because you can just kind of like steal that capital of people understanding and don't have to like over explain everything just because you're doing something like very similar but with your own twist to it, I guess. um, with the like games and stuff, do you look a lot at what other games are doing currently, and like how do you analyze them? How do you learn from other games?
So yeah, as with the previous theme that we just currently discussed, I think all of us, all of artists in game development industry or maybe post-production industry, we are kind of building our art on shoulders of the previous generations, and we are looking what was done previously, and we are trying to improve on that. And kind of we also, because we are doing that, we kind of following people's expectations in terms of how it should look like, especially again if it's something that not present in the real world. Because if it's actually present in the real world, you just try to make it look like the subject matter that you're trying to represent. So yeah, we are building all our craft on the shoulders of the previous generation, and we try to improve it. And maybe hopefully those other developers would look at what we did and they would also improve. And that's kind of constant race between variety of different studios in the world that trying to not necessarily trying to outdo some specific game or some specific effect, but they are get like very inspired by what was done by other people, and yeah, they're improving their own effects, and at the same time those effects also inspire new generation and so on and so forth. So again, in terms of uh, as you mentioned, like what kind of games we are trying to, or I'm trying to look for effects. So I'm um, I'm an avid gamer and I'm playing all type of games. I playing something from from Hearthstone to maybe more realistic shooter games, etc. I think there's a lot of inspiration in many of the games that was released like last year, this year, or 10 years ago, actually. So, um, and again, I think this is a uh, part of my professional deformation because when I'm playing the game, I instantly looking at effects and I'm instantly kind of understanding how it was done. So partially that illusion that artists try to create is, I won't say not working to me, but not as convincing to me. Or I can see some small bits or some small issues that I probably encountered when I was doing that effect as well and couldn't overcome, for example. And I see it in their work and I'm like, oh, it's good that not only I did that mistake or something like that. Or maybe I'm not seeing any of those mistakes that I've did and were still present in my latest version of that kind of effect. And yeah, that get me inspired to get better, to understand how it was done. So yeah, as I mentioned, all games work as inspiration. There's definitely a lot of interesting things in all of them, and partially that is again back to the overall animation of the effect and overall the shape and silhouette of the effect. Not necessary. I don't necessarily need to watch the realistic games to get inspired. A lot of stylized get me very inspired as well.
Do you have like a favorite game that you think did like the best VFX for whatever reason?
So I, I think that there are games with some effects in them that I liked currently the most. Like for example, if there's like a lot of games did the waterfall effects, and when I'm playing several games that was released like this year or last year, I'm comparing that specific effect between them, and it I might like the um, waterfall from one specific game, but I can like the other effects from other specific game, etc. So it's not like, this effect, this game in terms of effects are my most favorite one. It's more I'm loving effect that in this game that specific effect, but I'm loving like a fireball, for example, from the other game, or thunderbolt from a third game, and so on and so forth, or some specific spell that only exists in one game. Like I really like how it was created. So yeah, things like that. I won't pick any names because again, I have a really big respect to all the VFX artists, and everybody is constantly improving and polishing their craft. And it's really good to, you know, to play the game of the same developer, but then play the next part of that game and see and try to understand if they actually learn some lessons and how they improve what they had previously. It's always good. It's especially when there's a lot of improvement. You're like, oh yeah, they totally recreated that effect and did it in a completely different way, and now it looks way better. So yeah, you're happy when the people evolved, or maybe somebody else did their take on that specific spell or something like that. So yeah.
Yeah, that's very interesting of like playing the game of the developer and seeing how they're progressing. Yeah, I never thought. Um, um,
No worries.
did I? No. And from like a player perspective, VFX is like very important for like communicating things to players. What's kind of like your take on the importance of VFX and how do you, what things to consider when you're doing this?
So yeah, as I mentioned previously, and as you mentioned, yeah, there are some games, and there's a lot of pretty famous games that all the players' interaction or the interaction between players are done via actually using the effects. So in the game where you're constantly casting spells or constantly shooting at other players, you're basically constantly communicating with other players via VFX. So again, and at that point, it's quite important to get all of those correct and right. So um, as I mentioned, there's a lot of articles written about how to properly, create an I don't know area of effect spell, so it would look and the damage area would be properly represented with what you are trying to do with the effect. If it would be explosion, then the size of the explosion would be kind of exactly like the damage area that it's this spell or grenade is doing. Um, and I would say in most of the recent games, and when I say recent, I mean like 5, 7 years, I kind of didn't saw any game that the effect was like way smaller compared to the damage area that it was doing, or where effect was completely not representative of how much damage it was doing. Though there are some games where you get a big weapon and you're shooting it expecting that it will just deal tons of damage, but it didn't. Yeah, that happens from time to time, and maybe at that point, the effect from that game would also look very flashy, but won't do as much damage as you expected. But again, I think this is kind of some kind of problem probably in the I don't know, last minute rebalancing when the weapon asset and the effect, etc., they were already done, set in stone, and there was basically no time to remake them. But there was rebalancing of of the weapon damage because of some game design issues or something like that.
I
So
was
yeah,
gonna say it totally was a designer last minute nerfing the gun because it was too powerful, and then VFX were like, no, sorry guys, we can't do it.
yeah. But again, it's usually it's not like you're shooting an atomic bomb and it just does one HP damage or something like
Yeah.
that. It never happens. It's maybe uh, I don't know 50% less that you expected in terms of damage, but still a lot of damage and still a pretty big area of damage or something like that.
Are there,
So yeah.
are there any ways to like kind of mitigate when you're making a VFX those kind of last minute changes and making things more generic while still communicating things to the player?
So I think if you will do things more generic, then in the end of the day, it would just look more generic and kind of maybe not interesting. So I would say again, a good game development process probably would be to just create a prototype for your level, prototype for your weapons and other things. And yeah, VFX would give you a white box representation of those effects, and game design would be able to play with them to adjust their damage scale, etc. I When I was doing some weapons, I remember for some prototype in one of my previous company, what I've actually did, I've created an effect for the EOE type of weapon. An effect had just a semi-transparent sphere, and I gave a game designer controls so he would be able to change the sphere size. So when he were creating a bigger area of effect, the sphere was changing its size. And the game design played with it for a month or two, or maybe less, and uh, they were balancing some other weapons as well in this kind of similar fashion. And when they were happy with the size of the area and how much damage it does, they basically saved it in the current state and gave it back to me, and then kind of explained that it's area of damage, but than this area that were created also doing damage over time for, I don't know, half a minute, 30 seconds. So that's what I've created in the end of the day, the visuals for that. And for some other weapons. I think it's a pretty good process to do things like that. Um, it's it doesn't work all the time because in some cases you could be the game design could be balancing weapons and creating some new weapons, and at the same time you need to create a pretty good visuals for those weapons or something like that, because uh, there would be like a green light of some sorts pretty much soon. So it should play good and it also should look uh, a little bit kind of somewhat convincing. I won't say polished or have a final look, but somewhat convincing. So at that point, there could be some issues. But yeah, if you are know what your game would be, if you're knowing what those weapons would be, you can give your game designers those kind of controls, and in the end of the day, it would kind of work really well for everybody.
Yeah, I love when the content teams do that, like animation where I can change the length, or like VFX where I can change the sphere. This is perfect. It's like you can play around with that. But yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, thank you so much. I've learned so many things today about VFX. Do you have kind of like any, I guess, last advice or thoughts on the topic for people who either like learning to do VFX and want to get into the job, or people just generally interested in VFX?
Um, I would say this is quite interesting and creative field, the real-time VFX, and there's a lot of opportunities to use any kind of the art skills that you've obtained in your past. There's a lot of implications for any kind of techniques. I also would say if you want to break in and you don't know where to start, there's actually several pretty good courses around. Like for example, CG Master Academy, they have an real-time VFX online course, or Rebel Way have also real-time VFX for games course, and it's around like 8 weeks long, where you are working with in a group of people, and you have a mentor. You're working towards some goals. You're creating a variety of different effects for actually for the games, and you taught how to optimize them as well. If you're aiming into more stylized effects and you want to know how to properly draw them frame by frame and use other different techniques, not necessarily like a frame by frame drawing, but something else to make it also look stylized, I would highly suggest VFX Apprentice School. They have a lot of mentors from Riot Games, for example, and from other companies that have like really good looking stylized effects in them. So that, and they also have variety of different courses for those. So yeah, highly recommended. And last but not least, I have a book here called Elemental Magic by Joseph Gilland. Um, and it's called The Art of Special Effects Animation. So this book was written maybe 20 years ago by one of the really great 2D VFX animator that was creating effects for a lot of feature films. I think for Warner Bros, maybe Disney as well. I don't remember. But it's you can buy it on Amazon. I saw this book reappearing in almost any VFX artist interview, being it like from Epic Games or from some other companies. I think this is the table book for the VFX artist. It's really good. It's not that long. There's a lot of good ideas how to think about the VFX that you are creating, and a lot of examples what you should be thinking about, and how you can do those, drawing them frame by frame. But all of those techniques and thought process are actually applicable for, I think, any kind of VFX. So yeah, again, highly recommended. Buy it, look through it. It definitely would help.
Awesome. Thank you so much. It's a lot of resources as well, very useful. But yeah, thank you so much for coming here. Um,
Oh, sorry, and I forgot. Uh, Last but not least, there's a realtimevfx.com where there's all of the real-time VFX artists are gathered there. There's a really good forum. You can post your work, and it can be reviewed by the pros in the industry, and you can get a lot of advices how to improve. Or you can also find a job there. So, yeah.
Great, thank you. Well,
Thank you as
that
well.
concludes our episode on VFX for the Game Dev London podcast. Let us know what you think. Join us in Discord and Twitter and YouTube. And also, like, you can find all of the previous episodes and new episodes on the gamedev.london website, as well as many other resources and informations about events. Thank you, everyone. See you this time next Monday. Bye.